Do you find pastels to be really messy and hard to work with? Well, there are some suppliers that you can use that are far less messy than traditional pastel sticks, and they're really easy to work with as well. I'm Kirsty Rebecca, and I make drawing and painting tutorials that are easy to follow even if you're just starting out. The first tip is to use a sanded paper, and there are papers out there labelled as pastel paper, but I find that the surface is too smooth, and instead of your pastel gripping to the paper, it kind of falls off and is very powdery and dusty. I use Clairefontaine Pastel Mat, which grips the pastel really well. It comes in a variety of colours. You can get it in white as well, like this pad, or you can get larger sheets in different colours. So Pastel Mat grips the pastel really well, meaning there is a lot less dust and fall off, and the added benefit is that you can add many more layers than you could with other brands of smoother pastel paper. You're always going to get some dust using pastels, but sanded paper reduces that dramatically. So here you can see me using pan pastels, and they're basically just a compressed soft pastel in these little cakes. I find that they're great for soft and out of focus backgrounds or for underlayers, and you apply them by using these tools, which can come in a variety of sizes for different needs. And you don't have to have a massive set like I do. You can actually mix them on a separate piece of paper, like just printer paper, and transfer the color from there onto your piece. And these are great because you actually don't need to touch the pastel at all. You can use these tools and it keeps your hands clean the entire time. And these are extremely light fast, meaning that your artwork won't fade for many years, and they're just as vibrant as traditional pastels, and in some cases even more vibrant. So I've just slowed it down so you can see how I'm using the pan pastels, and off the edge of the screen there I'm actually mixing the colors that you can see on the pans to the side, so I have a more accurate color for that area. And with the base layers, I make sure that I only apply a really small amount of pastel to make sure that I still have enough tooth left on the paper to be able to add more layers of detail on top of that. With the background that I did a bit earlier, you can use a lot more pastel in many layers on top of each other until you get that smooth out of focus look that you're after. So it is really versatile. You can continue to add many layers until it's as vibrant as you need it to be, or you can just use it as an underlayer and just use a really light amount because it's really easy to control using the soft tool. And again, the benefit is that you don't actually have to touch the pastel at all. You're just touching the tool to apply it to the piece. So with my underlayer, I'm just making sure that I'm going slightly darker than what I want the end result to be, so that when I lay the pastel pencils on top, I have something to build onto. So if I put a light value down first, like a really bright white, and then I'm not going to be able to add a lighter color on top of that, it's just not going to show up. So once I finish applying the base layers with the pan pastels, I move on to using pastel pencils for the details. And there are a few different brands out there, but the main ones that I use are the Stabilo Carbothello and the Faber-Castell Pitt pastels. So you can use pastel pencils for the entire piece if you like, from start to finish. They're really good at layering as well. I just find that it's more cost effective to use the pan pastels for larger areas and then just save the pencils for the final details and smaller areas. So you probably noticed that I didn't get into all of the areas with the pan pastels because I just found that the tools were a little bit too big to get into some of those, and the pencils would have been a bit easier to get into those areas. When you're working on sanded paper, especially with the pastel pencils, when you lay them down it almost looks a little bit gritty, and if that's not the look that you're going for, you're going to need to blend them out with something so that it creates a little bit of a softer look. And also when you blend the pastels into the paper, it lets you add a little bit more pastel on top of that rather than just leaving it unblended. It's like you're almost pushing the pastel into the grooves of the paper to allow more tooth to come through. So there are a few different ways that I use to blend out pastels, and one of them is by using a cotton tip, and most people have these around their house anyway, so that's a great tool especially for the smaller kind of areas. And the blending stump is also another great tool, and you can use these with graphite or charcoal or things like that as well, but I find that they're quite good for the really small areas with pastels. And the third option is with a soft tool, and these are the same tools that you use to apply the pan pastels with, but you can actually just use a clean one and blend in the pastel pencils that you've laid down with that. And if you don't mind getting your hands a little bit dirty, you can also use your fingers. And I actually do this quite often. I do an entire layer using the pastel pencil, and then I'll go in with my fingers and blend it out, and then I'll just wash my hands and continue on to the next layer. So I've just slowed this down a bit so you can see how I'm blending out with the cotton tip. And you can see it's really quite easy. It blends out all those really harsh pastel strokes quite smoothly and gives it a much more softer look. So working this way with the pastel pencils and then blending it out, you can actually add many, many layers on top of each other because you're blending the pastel into the tooth of the paper, which allows you to add more layers. So another couple of tips to avoid being messy with pastels is by keeping a piece of paper underneath your hand. So you can lay this piece of paper on top of your artwork and rest your hand on that, and that way you don't smudge your artwork and you don't end up with pastel on your hands as well. And if you wanted to be even extra clean with the pastels, you could start in the top left corner and then work your way down and across, and that way you're never resting your hand on any pastel. But this method only works well if you work in little tiny sections and complete each section before moving on. Whereas the way that I work is I do an entire layer over the whole piece and then blend that out and then go back over the entire piece with another layer, so there's always pastel on my artwork. So by keeping this piece of paper underneath my hand, I avoid touching the artwork with my hand at all times. So when you work this way by blending the pastel pencils every layer that you do, you just got to keep in mind that you need to try and not add too many details in each layer because you're going to blend it out and you're going to lose a lot of that detail. So just keep the final little tiny details to the last few layers, and then when you go and blend them out, you might not want to be so harsh and blend it completely smooth if you want some of those details to show through. Sometimes I get to the end of my pieces and I really want that little bit of extra punch that sometimes the pastel pencils won't give me. So sometimes I end up using a soft pastel stick in the last layer just to brighten up those whites, or if I need a really vibrant color, I might use a soft pastel stick for that because it can be a little bit brighter than the pastel pencils. So this would be the only time that I would get my hands dirty with pastels. But again, it's only that one layer, and then you can go and wash your hands once you're finished with that and then continue on with your pastel pencils if you like. And another tip for working with pastels and making it a bit less messy is by taping your artwork down, and this creates that little border around the outside so that you have something to hold on to when you're moving your piece around or when you're trying to frame it or show it in some way. You can actually hold that and you don't have to touch your artwork with your fingers as well. And to store my pastel artwork, I either wrap it in glassine like a present, or I slot it into a big tracing paper pad and just tape it into place, and that way there's a piece of tracing paper in between every bit of artwork that I have, and it's not going to touch any other piece of artwork. If you'd like some more tips using pastels, or if you'd like some tutorials that are a bit more slowed down and have a bit more explanation of how I created the pieces, then there's a playlist on the screen, so just click on that and I'll see you over there.